The great hall of the Veyari Palace glittered with silver light. Tall crystal pillars stretched upward, glowing softly, while the floor reflected the stars painted on the ceiling. Nobles in bright robes stood in circles, whispering, laughing, watching the strange sight before them. A human was about to marry into the royal family. Captain Elias Ward stood proud, his Earth uniform traded for ceremonial white robes. His face was calm, though he felt the weight of every eye fixed on him. He knew what they thought. A human among us? A soldier turned prince? Ridiculous! Yet he stood firm, because this was not just politics to him. This was about her. Beside him stood Princess Serenia. Her beauty was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Skin like soft blue light, hair like strands of silver silk, and eyes that shimmered like water under the moon. She looked perfect to everyone else, but he could see the truth hiding in her trembling hands, in the way she kept her head bowed, unable to meet the crowd's gaze. They all knew her secret. Serenia was infertile, in a world where bloodlines ruled, where children meant legacy, power, and pride. Serenia was considered broken. She was a princess who could not give the one thing her people valued most: heirs. And now, in front of the whole empire, she was being bound to a human husband, as if to make the mockery complete. Whispers traveled like snakes through the hall. Look at him. He does not even know. A human married to a barren jewel? How pitiful. They match. A useless man for a useless woman. The words burned Serenia's ears. Her chest tightened, shame filling every breath. She wanted to disappear into the floor. This was not a wedding. It was a public humiliation, arranged by her father to rid himself of her, while pretending it was a gesture of peace with Earth. She felt her hands shake as she lifted them for the ritual binding. She expected Elias to hesitate, to hear the whispers and reconsider, to let go of her and leave her alone in her shame. But he did not. Elias took her hands gently, steady and warm, as if shielding her from the storm. His eyes, a human's simple brown, met hers with a strength that silenced the noise for a moment. He smiled softly, and it was not the smile of pity. It was the smile of someone who had already chosen. When the priest spoke the sacred words, Elias's voice was steady. I take Serenia, not as a duty, not as a bargain, but as my wife, and I will walk with her, in peace or in storm, in shame or in honor, until the end of my days. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some scoffed, some laughed outright, but Serenia froze. Her silver eyes widened, her breath caught in her chest. No one had ever spoken such words to her. Not her father, not her siblings, not anyone in the court. To them she was a broken piece of jewelry, but to this human, she was enough. Her lips trembled, tears gathered at the edges of her eyes, though she fought to hold them back. She wanted to believe his words, but the voices around her whispered louder and louder. Poor fool! He does not understand what he's done. She will ruin him. The ceremony ended with applause that was hollow, mocking, cruel. The nobles clapped with forced smiles, their laughter hiding behind silk fans and jeweled masks. To them, this marriage was a joke, a human bound to a barren princess. Nothing more. But when the hall emptied and the crowd's laughter faded, Elias leaned close to Serenia. She was still trembling, her gaze fixed on the floor. Slowly, he lifted her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. I don't care what they say, he whispered. You are not broken. You're mine. And I will never let you walk alone. The words struck deeper than any blade. For the first time in years, Serenia felt warmth rise inside her chest. Her hands stopped shaking. She did not speak, for her throat was tight with tears. But in that moment, she believed him. The mocking had begun, yes, but so too had something stronger. And though the world saw only shame, Elias Ward saw something else. A beginning. The palace, grand and glittering, felt colder than ever after the ceremony. Its halls, filled with echoes of mockery and whispers, became a prison for Princess Serenia. Every room she entered seemed to judge her. Every mirror reflected her shame. Even the sunlight that poured through the tall windows could not warm her heart. Elias never left her side. He moved with her, laughed softly with her, and spoke words that slowly became her lifeline. He refused to let the whispers of the nobles define her, refused to let the world's cruel judgments shape her worth. But even his devotion could not erase the weight of years spent in quiet humiliation. At the banquets, the high tables glistened with food, jewels, and laughter. Other wives bore children in golden cradles, each infant a symbol of power, love, and respect. Serenia's gaze would fall to the floor. She had no child to show, no legacy to offer, and every glance at those tiny hands reaching for their mothers reminded her of her failure in the eyes of the court. The whispers were always there, carried on silken tongues. She cannot give life. Why keep her? A curse walks beside our soldiers. The human is blind or foolish to stay. Sometimes Serenia would hear laughter behind the doors. The kind of laughter that echoed through corridors and shattered her chest. She would walk through the halls with her head down, her hands clutched tightly in front of her, feeling smaller than the shadows cast by the palace pillars. Elias never blamed her. He never flinched or turned away. In the quiet of the palace, when the laughter faded but the memory remained, he cooked for her when she lost her appetite. He carried her when she refused to face the eyes of strangers. He held her through the nights that were long and heavy with silent tears, whispering into her hair, "You are enough. You are everything I need." But Serenia could not believe it. She longed to feel worthy, to be seen as more than a broken princess. At night, she would lie in her bed, silver hair spilling across silk sheets, staring at the ceiling as if it could answer her questions. "Why me?" she whispered into the dark. "Why am I cursed to bring nothing but shame?" Sometimes, she would rise silently, moving through the palace gardens where the alien trees glowed faintly in the moonlight. The air smelled of sweet blooms and wet stone. She would trace her fingers over petals, wishing she could nurture life as easily as the flowers did. But the truth weighed on her, heavy and unrelenting. And yet, Elias never stopped believing in her. He held her hand when she felt the emptiness of the world pressing down. He spoke of love not as a transaction, not as a duty, but as a promise. Every day, he reminded her that her value did not lie in what she could or could not bear, but in who she was. Some nights, when the palace was silent and shadows danced against the walls, Serenia would wake and whisper to him, her voice trembling, "Why do you stay with me? I am worthless. I have nothing to give you." Elias would always reply, gently, firmly, "Because love is not a bargain. It is not measured in heirs or crowns. It is a choice, and I choose you every day." Slowly, the fire in her chest flickered back to life. Faint but persistent, she began to see the small moments of beauty in the palace. The way sunlight caught the edge of Elias's hair, the softness of his hand on hers, the quiet strength in his eyes. She realized that, perhaps, the world's judgment did not matter. Perhaps her worth was not determined by the blood she could give, but by the love she could share. And still, the palace whispered. Still, the nobles' laughter echoed in her ears. But in the midst of those long years, something grew. A quiet hope, a seed of courage, and a trust in the human who never let go. For the first time, Serenia began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this place. Not as a princess mocked for her failure, but as someone who could rise above it, hand in hand with the man who saw her for all she truly was. The years of silence were not easy. They were heavy and painful, filled with doubt and sorrow. But in that quiet suffering, Elias and Serenia built something stronger than mockery. A bond that no laughter, no curse, no cruel whisper could ever break. And in that bond, the first glimmer of hope began to shine. The grand celebration of stars arrived with dazzling lights and endless music. The palace hall gleamed like a sky full of fireflies. Nobles in shining robes moved gracefully across the marble floor, and servants floated silently, carrying trays of sparkling food. Outside, fireworks painted the night sky with colors no one on earth had ever seen. Serenia felt trapped. Each laugh, each whisper, felt louder tonight than ever before. Her dress shimmered like silver water, but she could not feel beautiful. All she could feel was the weight of judgment pressing down from the gilded walls around her. Elias stood beside her, calm and strong as always. His hand brushed lightly over hers, a quiet promise in the chaos. He smiled, but Serenia saw his eyes flick toward her, filled with concern. He knew. He always knew. The nobles, drunk on pride and wine, were ready for amusement. Whispers and chuckles carried across the hall like a cold wind. They remembered her secret, her failure to produce an heir, and they took joy in it. Their eyes followed her with thinly veiled contempt, measuring every movement, every breath. And then, it happened. One of Serenia's cousins, a young prince swollen with arrogance and drunken courage, stepped forward. His jeweled cup lifted high as he shouted, his voice cutting through the music. To the human! The room turned silent, eyes snapping toward him. Serenia's chest tightened. The only man in the galaxy proud enough, the prince continued, stumbling slightly, to marry a hollow vessel. Laughter exploded around the hall, sharp and cruel, slicing through Serenia like knives. She froze, her hands clutching her gown, her face pale. The world blurred around her. Elias moved, but Serenia was faster. She bolted from the hall, her silver hair trailing behind her, and ran. She didn't know where she was going. The balcony, the gardens, anywhere but here. She could hear the laughter behind her, following her, chasing her shame like hounds. She found herself standing at the balcony, staring at the stars stretching across the night sky. The wind whipped through her hair, cold and raw, and she shivered. Her chest heaved, and tears fell freely now, unrestrained. "Maybe they're right," she whispered into the darkness. "Maybe I am nothing." The words hurt her to speak, but they felt true. For so many years, she had carried the weight of judgment. For so many years, she had tried to be strong, to live up to a standard she could never reach. And now, it seemed impossible. Elias appeared beside her quietly, his presence steady as a rock in a storm. He did not scold her. He did not try to chase away her sorrow with words that might sound hollow. He simply reached out, took her hands in his, and held them gently, grounding her. "Serenia," he said softly, his voice warm against the cold night. "You are not nothing. You never have been. If they cannot see your worth, then it is their blindness. We will find a place where no one mocks you. We will make our own path." Her tears fell faster now, but there was something in his voice that felt like a promise. Steady, unshakable, real. She wanted to believe him, but years of shame and mockery had made her doubt every kind word, every gentle gesture. "I am nothing," she said again, her voice breaking. Elias shook his head, firm but tender. "No, you are everything. You are brave. You are beautiful. You are not defined by what you cannot give. You are defined by the love you choose to give. And I choose you, Serenia. I have always chosen you." The words sank into her chest, mingling with the bitter taste of years of ridicule. Slowly, the fire within her, long buried under shame, began to flicker again. It was fragile, small, but it was there. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if answering the unspoken promise between them. Serenia leaned into Elias, resting her head against his shoulder. The wind carried the laughter of the nobles from the hall far below, but it could not touch them here. Not tonight. Not in this moment. For the first time in a long time, she felt the possibility of hope. She felt the strength that came from knowing someone believed in her completely, without question. The breaking point had come, but it had not shattered her. Instead, it had revealed something new. A determination to survive, to rise, to one day prove the world wrong. And Elias whispered one final promise into the night. No one will break you. Not them. Not fate. We will face this together. Serenia closed her eyes, letting the words fill her heart. The palace could mock her, the nobles could sneer, but she had him. And perhaps, she thought, that was enough to begin again. The next morning, the palace felt different to Serenia. The mocking eyes were still there. The whispers still followed her. But something inside her had changed. The fire that Elias had helped her ignite burned quietly, steady and warm. She knew she could no longer live for their approval. She had to live for herself, for the life she wanted to build with him. Elias stood at the balcony, packing supplies into a small ship they had prepared in secret. He glanced at her, and she felt a rush of courage. Together, they were leaving the palace, leaving the cold corridors, the jeweled halls, the endless judgment behind. The galaxy awaited, wide and open, full of possibilities they had never dared to imagine. As they left the Empire behind, stars stretched across the sky in ways that made Serenia's breath catch. Worlds passed beneath them, mountains taller than any palace, oceans that glowed under twin moons, deserts that shimmered like gold. She felt a strange freedom, a sensation she had never known in the tight, ordered halls of her home. Here, no one knew who she was or what she could not give. Here, she could be Serenia, not a princess cursed with infertility, not a subject of mockery, but simply herself. But even in this freedom, her heart ached. She still wished she could give Elias a child of her own. She still carried the heavy question of worth inside her, even as planets and stars unfolded before her eyes. Some nights, when the ship hummed softly and the children's laughter echoed only in her memory, she would lie awake, staring at the alien constellations and whisper, "I want to be more. I want to give life, even if I cannot give my own." Elias never judged her. He held her close when she whispered her sorrow, letting her cry freely. "You are already everything," he told her. "The life we will create is not defined by what we cannot give. We define it ourselves." Their journey eventually brought them to a forgotten planet at the edge of the galaxy. It was a small world, with gentle hills and rivers that sparkled like liquid crystal under its pale sun. It was quiet, untouched, and welcoming. Here, they found an orphanage, small and rough, but alive with laughter and hope. Children of many alien races ran barefoot through the dusty yards, their eyes wide with curiosity, their smiles bright even though their clothes were tattered. The caretaker, an old woman with deep wrinkles and eyes that had seen too much, greeted them cautiously. "They are the unwanted," she said softly, guiding Serenia through the rows of small beds and tables. "The ones no family would claim. Some have been abandoned. Some were left behind. They have survived, but they are fragile. They need care. They need love." Serenia felt her chest tighten as she knelt among the children. A small boy, no taller than her knee, shyly extended a hand and whispered, "Mother?" The word, soft and trembling, struck her heart like a hammer. She froze for a moment, tears welling in her eyes. She had never imagined being called that before. Not by a child of her own, not by anyone. Elias stood behind her, watching her face light up with a mixture of shock, joy, and wonder. He smiled gently, knowing that this was the moment they had both been waiting for. "Then let us be their parents," he said simply. "We may not have children of our own, but we can give them a family. We can give them a home." And so they began. Serenia cared for the children with a patience and devotion that surprised even her. She cooked, cleaned, taught, and played. Each small hand that clutched hers, each laugh that rang in the air, healed a piece of her heart that the palace had broken. Elias guided, taught, and protected, always beside her, always steady. In the quiet moments, Serenia would look at the horizon, at the sun sinking behind distant hills, and realize something profound. She had once believed she was empty, that she could never create life or love. But now, surrounded by children she had chosen and who had chosen her, she understood that motherhood was not only born from blood. It was born from care, from sacrifice, from courage, from the simple act of loving fiercely, no matter what the world said. The galaxy stretched endlessly before them, full of unknown worlds and unseen wonders. Serenia's heart, once heavy with shame, now felt light and alive. The path would not be easy. She knew hardship would come, as it always did. But for the first time in her life, she felt hope, real and burning, in every beat of her heart. Elias squeezed her hand gently. "This is only the beginning," he whispered. Serenia smiled through her tears, finally believing him, finally believing herself. And in that moment, the girl who had once been mocked and shamed realized something incredible. They were no longer running from the world. They were building a world of their own. Years passed quietly on the small, forgotten planet. The days were filled with laughter, learning, and simple joys. Serenia had grown into her role as mother, her once fragile heart now strong and steady. Children ran through the fields, their voices echoing with a kind of joy she had never heard in the palace. Elias watched her sometimes, silently amazed at how fully she had transformed, how love had shaped her into someone far greater than she had ever imagined herself to be. But word traveled, faster than they had expected. Rumors of the human and his infertile princess, who raised abandoned children, reached the ears of the Veyari nobility. And as always, where the nobles' ears were concerned, laughter and contempt followed quickly. "They gather cast-offs," one voice sneered. "A pathetic human, teaching children that are not his. And she pretends to be a mother." Elias heard the whispers before Serenia did, but he did not warn her. He wanted her to feel the fire within herself, the strength that had carried them so far. Serenia, unaware, was kneeling in the dirt, braiding flowers into the hair of a small green-skinned girl. Her silver hair shimmered in the sunlight, and her blue skin seemed to glow with life. When the emissaries arrived, expecting to witness failure, their jaws dropped. They had imagined dirt, squalor, neglect. Instead, they saw children healthy, laughing, running freely across the hills. They saw Serenia's hands gently tying a braid, Elias kneeling beside a boy to show him how to plant seeds. The scene radiated warmth, care, and love. A family built not by birth, but by choice. Yet the nobles were not impressed. They stood stiff, arms crossed, sneers hidden behind carefully sculpted masks. One prince, tall and arrogant, spat words dripping with disdain. "They are not true children. They are not yours. This is nothing but folly." Serenia's chest rose and fell slowly. Her hands rested on the smallest child's shoulders. She looked directly at the prince, silver eyes steady, glowing with an inner fire. "They are mine," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "because I chose them, because I loved them when no one else would. And love makes a mother. Blood does not." The words echoed through the courtyard, cutting through the cold air of disbelief. The children stood close to her, holding hands, forming a circle of courage and pride. They were no longer orphans. They were family. And the woman who had once been mocked as infertile was their center, their heart, their strength. Elias stepped forward then, his hand brushing hers. He had never needed to speak. She had spoken for both of them. But his presence strengthened her words, a silent confirmation of the bond they shared. The emissaries whispered among themselves, unsure of how to respond. Their society had always measured worth by blood, by inheritance, by lineage. And here was proof that another kind of legacy existed, one built on courage, love, and choice. One of the older children, a tall boy with golden eyes, raised his voice. She gave us life. She gave us hope. To us, she is our mother. And through her love, we have grown stronger than any title, stronger than any bloodline. The courtyard fell silent. The voice, confident and unwavering, rang louder than any royal decree. The nobles could not ignore it. They could not erase it. The children's laughter, the love in Serenia's eyes, the steady presence of Elias. It all spoke of something far greater than their narrow rules of judgment. For Serenia, the feeling was intoxicating. She realized that the years of mockery, of whispers of doubt, they had all led her here. Every cruel word had sharpened her resolve. Every glance of pity had pushed her toward this moment of undeniable truth. She was not the broken princess they had claimed. She was a mother, a teacher, a leader of life itself. Elias squeezed her hand gently. "They mocked us," he whispered. "But it does not matter. We know the truth." Serenia smiled through tears, looking at her children who were now standing taller, proud and unafraid. "We have built something no one can take from us," she said softly. "They cannot touch this." And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, love, and life, the human and the so-called infertile princess felt the weight of the past lift. Mockery had followed them across worlds, but it could not follow their hearts. Not here. Not now. For the first time, they understood. What the world had tried to destroy had grown stronger, brighter, and more alive than anyone had ever imagined. Years passed quietly on the small, forgotten planet. The days were filled with laughter, learning, and simple joys. Serenia had grown into her role as mother, her once fragile heart now strong and steady. Children ran through the fields, their voices echoing with a kind of joy she had never heard in the palace. Elias watched her sometimes, silently amazed at how fully she had transformed, how love had shaped her into someone far greater than she had ever imagined herself to be. But word traveled, faster than they had expected. Rumors of the human and his infertile princess, who raised abandoned children, reached the ears of the Veyari nobility. And as always, where the nobles' ears were concerned, laughter and contempt followed quickly. "They gather cast-offs," one voice sneered. "A pathetic human, teaching children that are not his. And she pretends to be a mother." Elias heard the whispers before Serenia did, but he did not warn her. He wanted her to feel the fire within herself, the strength that had carried them so far. Serenia, unaware, was kneeling in the dirt, braiding flowers into the hair of a small green-skinned girl. Her silver hair shimmered in the sunlight, and her blue skin seemed to glow with life. When the emissaries arrived, expecting to witness failure, their jaws dropped. They had imagined dirt, squalor, neglect. Instead, they saw children healthy, laughing, running freely across the hills. They saw Serenia's hands gently tying a braid, Elias kneeling beside a boy to show him how to plant seeds. The scene radiated warmth, care, and love. A family built not by birth, but by choice. Yet the nobles were not impressed. They stood stiff, arms crossed, sneers hidden behind carefully sculpted masks. One prince, tall and arrogant, spat words dripping with disdain. "They are not true children. They are not yours. This is nothing but folly." Serenia's chest rose and fell slowly. Her hands rested on the smallest child's shoulders. She looked directly at the prince, silver eyes steady, glowing with an inner fire. "They are mine," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "because I chose them, because I loved them when no one else would. And love makes a mother. Blood does not." The words echoed through the courtyard, cutting through the cold air of disbelief. The children stood close to her, holding hands, forming a circle of courage and pride. They were no longer orphans. They were family. And the woman who had once been mocked as infertile was their center, their heart, their strength. Elias stepped forward then, his hand brushing hers. He had never needed to speak. She had spoken for both of them. But his presence strengthened her words, a silent confirmation of the bond they shared. The emissaries whispered among themselves, unsure of how to respond. Their society had always measured worth by blood, by inheritance, by lineage. And here was proof that another kind of legacy existed, one built on courage, love, and choice. One of the older children, a tall boy with golden eyes, raised his voice. She gave us life. She gave us hope. To us, she is our mother. And through her love, we have grown stronger than any title, stronger than any bloodline. The courtyard fell silent. The voice, confident and unwavering, rang louder than any royal decree. The nobles could not ignore it. They could not erase it. The children's laughter, the love in Serena's eyes, the steady presence of Elias. It all spoke of something far greater than their narrow rules of judgment. For Serena, the feeling was intoxicating. She realized that the years of mockery, of whispers of doubt, they had all led her here. Every cruel word had sharpened her resolve. Every glance of pity had pushed her toward this moment of undeniable truth. She was not the broken princess they had claimed. She was a mother, a teacher, a leader of life itself. Elias squeezed her hand gently. "They mocked us," he whispered. "But it does not matter. We know the truth." Serena smiled through tears, looking at her children who were now standing taller, proud and unafraid. "We have built something no one can take from us," she said softly. "They cannot touch this." And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, love, and life, the human and the so-called infertile princess felt the weight of the past lift. Mockery had followed them across worlds, but it could not follow their hearts. Not here. Not now. For the first time, they understood. What the world had tried to destroy had grown stronger, brighter, and more alive than anyone had ever imagined. Years had passed since Serena and Elias left the Veyari Palace. The small, forgotten planet they had made their home flourished under their care. The children they raised had grown strong, clever, and brave. Each one carried the lessons of love, courage, and kindness that Serena had taught them. And though the galaxy was wide and uncertain, they were ready to face anything together. Word of their lives eventually reached the Empire again, but this time, not as whispers of mockery. The Veyari Empire faced crisis. Crops failed, disease spread, and enemies circled their borders like hungry wolves. The nobles, desperate and fearful, called for aid, recalling the princess they had once mocked and the human who had stood by her side. Serena did not hesitate. She and Elias boarded their ship with their children, now grown and capable, and journeyed back to the Empire. As they approached the Grand Palace, Serena felt her chest tighten. She had left this place with shame and tears, but she would return with pride, with strength, with the family she had chosen. The palace gates opened, and nobles gathered, their faces masks of disbelief. They had expected ruin, squalor, failure. Instead, they saw a vision they could not deny. Serena walked through the hall, not as the timid, fragile princess they had scorned, but as a mother. Behind her, children of many races, many sizes, many stories, walked tall and confident. They were healthy, strong, and shining with the love she had given them. Elias stood at her side, calm and proud. He had never doubted her. Never doubted that the girl they had once mocked would return stronger, braver, and unstoppable. The air in the hall was tense, thick with disbelief and unspoken questions. One of the princes, tall and haughty, broke the silence with a sneer. "You return with strays," he said, voice sharp, not airs. "Do you call this a family?" Serena's silver eyes met his cold gaze. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried through the hall like a bell. "They are not strays. They are my children. I raised them with love, with care, with hope. They are the proof that family is not always born of blood, but of heart, of courage, and of choice." The children stepped forward, standing proudly beside her. One young man, with golden eyes and a confident stance, raised his head and declared, "She gave us life. She gave us strength. She gave us hope. To us, she is our mother, and through her, we have become more than any title or bloodline could ever make us." A hush fell over the hall. The nobles whispered, eyes wide with shock. They could not deny the truth. These children, once considered unwanted, had grown into capable, intelligent, and honorable beings. And the woman who had been mocked as infertile had built something no one could break. Serena took a deep breath, feeling a wave of emotion rise within her. For years, she had carried shame, doubt, and fear. She had believed she was broken, that she could never give anything of worth. And yet, here she stood, surrounded by life she had nurtured, by love she had created, and by a human who had never let her falter. Elias placed his hand gently over hers. "They mocked us," he whispered, "but we never doubted. And now, they see what we always knew. Love is stronger than blood, stronger than judgment, stronger than fear." Tears filled Serena's eyes, not of sadness, but of triumph. She looked at each of her children, now standing tall and proud, and she felt the weight of years of pain lift from her shoulders. The girl who had once been scorned, ridiculed, and called barren had returned as a mother. A true mother, in every sense of the word. The nobles could only bow their heads, humbled by the truth they had ignored for so long. The princess they had laughed at, the human they had mocked, had returned not as weak or broken, but as the center of life, hope, and courage. Serena raised her chin, silver hair glinting in the sunlight streaming through the palace windows. She felt the fire of determination in her heart. This was her victory, her family, her proof that love could defy every expectation. She had returned not for approval, not for recognition, but to show the world what truly mattered. The strength of the heart, the courage to love, and the power of family chosen freely. And as she stood there, hand in hand with Elias, surrounded by the children she had raised, she knew that nothing, not mockery, not cruelty, not doubt, could ever take this from her. She had returned as a mother. She had returned as a queen of life itself.